Political assassinations, civil war close calls, criminal politicians, a Prime Minister that disappeared, and a sitting Member of Parliament that is admitted to aching the Beatles. Australian politics is something else, and if you want to find out the lore behind all these stories and so much more, you'll have to stay tuned. As we are coming into election season, this is the perfect video for first-time voters, voters wishing to brush up on Auspol knowledge, people moving to Australia that wish to acquaint themselves with our political system, or simply anybody that wants to learn something new. If you are unaware as to what an iceberg chart explanation video is, iceberg charts derive from the term just the tip of the iceberg, the tip referring to the most well-known knowledge regarding, in our case, Australian politics. Each tier gets more and more obscure, with the bottom tiers being very obscure and or dark events in the history of Australian politics. Join me as we go down the Australian political iceberg.
Tier 4. Double dissolutions. A double dissolution is a mechanism provided by the Australian Constitution to resolve deadlocks between the House of Representatives and the Senate. If the Senate twice rejects or fails to pass a bill from the House, when the second rejection occurs 3 months after the first rejection, the Governor-General can dissolve both Houses of Parliament. This triggers a federal election where all seats in both Houses are contested, unlike normal elections where only half the Senate seats are up for election. The aim is to break the deadlock by giving voters the chance to elect a Parliament that will pass the legislation. State Governors. State Governors in Australia are the King's representatives in each of the 6 states, appointed by the monarch on the state premier's advice, typically for 5 years. They perform ceremonial duties like opening parliament and constitutional roles, such as assenting to state legislation, appointing premiers, and dissolving parliament. Modelled on the federal governor-general, their powers are largely formal, exercised on ministerial advice, though they retain reserved powers for rare crises, such as dismissing a government. Robodebt. Robodebt was an Australian government automated debt recovery scheme launched in 2016 to reclaim alleged welfare overpayments, targeting recipients via data matching of Centrelink and tax records. It wrongly issued tens of thousands of debt notices, often inflated or baseless, reversing the burden of proof onto recipients. Widespread distress, including suicides, prompted a Royal Commission in 2023 which found it unlawful, unethical and poorly executed, with senior officials blamed for ignoring legal advice. The government settled a nearly $2 billion class action in 2021, refunding 470,000 debts, marking it as a major public policy failure, with former Prime Minister Scott Morrison being one of the figures responsible for this program. Hawke's world record. In 1954, when he was a Rhodes Scholar student at Oxford University, former Prime Minister Bob Hawke set a world record for the fastest time to scull a yard of vowel, only taking him 11 seconds. The world record has since been broken. Detention centres. Australia's detention centres hold asylum seekers arriving by boat, primarily on Manus Island in Papua New Guinea, Nauru and Christmas Island, under mandatory detention laws in effect since 1992. Managed by the federal government, they aim to process claims offshore while deterring unauthorised arrivals. Controversy arose over harsh conditions, reports of overcrowding, poor healthcare and abuse, leading to protests, legal challenges and UN criticism. A 2016 leak of 2,000 incident reports from Nauru detailed self-harm and child maltreatment. The policy, costing billions, has drawn scrutiny for its human rights impact and effectiveness, with courts occasionally intervening. Pine Gap. Pine Gap is a joint Australian-American satellite surveillance facility near Alice Springs, operational since 1970 under a defence agreement. Officially named the Joint Defence Facility Pine Gap, it collects signals intelligence, supports military operations and monitors missile launches, employing around 800 staff. Managed by both the US National Security Agency and Australian agencies, its strategic role aids both the nation's security. Conspiracies surround it, with some claiming it spies on Australian citizens, controls drones for extrajudicial strikes, or hides extraterrestrial secrets, assertions dismissed by officials as baseless. Conscription. Conscription in Australia during the Vietnam War began in 1964 under the National Service Act, requiring 20-year-old men selected by birth date lottery to serve 2 years in the military. Introduced by Prime Minister Robert Menzies to bolster forces amid Cold War tensions, it sent over 15,000 conscripts to Vietnam between 1965 and 1972, with 200 killed. Public opposition grew, protests erupted, and conscientious objectors faced jail, leading to its suspension in 1972 by incoming Prime Minister Gough Whitlam after he won that year's election. War crimes. Australia's history of war crimes primarily centres on its military involvement in Afghanistan, where a 2020 inquiry found credible evidence that Australia's special forces unlawfully killed 39 civilians and prisoners between 2005 and 2016, often in a culture of impunity. Allegations include execution and blooding rituals, with some incidents covered up by planting weapons on victims. Investigations continue, with one soldier charged in 2023. Whistleblower David McBride, who exposed these acts by leaking documents to the ABC, was sentenced to 5 years and 8 months in prison in 2024, which was very controversial. Famous High Court cases. Australia's most famous High Court cases shaped its legal and political landscape. Mabo vs Queensland 1992 overturned terra nullius, recognising Indigenous land rights and enabling native title claims. The Australian Communist Party vs the Commonwealth 1951 struck down a law banning the Communist Party, affirming free speech limits on government power. Cole vs Whitfield in 1988 clarified free trade between the states under Section 92 of the Constitution, boosting economic unity. The Wick Peoples vs Queensland 1996 upheld native title post-mining leases. Executive, concurrent and residual powers. In Australia, governmental powers are divided between the Commonwealth and the state. Exclusive powers belong solely to the Commonwealth, such as defence, currency and trade. Concurrent powers are shared, like taxation, where Commonwealth law prevails if there's a conflict. Residual powers, not specifically granted to the Commonwealth, remain with the states, including law and order and local governance. The Australian capital dispute. The Australian capital dispute arose in the late 19th century during federation talks as Sydney and Melbourne competed to be the nation's capital. Both cities, economic powerhouses in New South Wales and Victoria respectively, vied for the prestige, causing a deadlock. The 1898 Constitutional Convention resolved this in section 125 of the Constitution, mandating a capital within New South Wales but at least 100 miles from Sydney. This led to Canberra's election in 1908, with its construction starting in 1913, after a design contest won by Walter Burley Griffin. The Aboriginal Tent Embassy is a protest site established on Australia Day 1972 outside Old Parliament House in Canberra by Indigenous activists. It began with 4 men planting an umbrella to demand land rights and sovereignty, reacting to the McMahon government's rejection of Aboriginal land claims. It continues to exist to this day. It is the longest Indigenous land rights protest in the world, marking its 53rd anniversary in January. House only and half Senate elections. Most Australian elections pair House elections with half Senate votes, or occurring as double dissolutions, so the Constitution allows separate timings. In hung parliaments, a Prime Minister might call a House-only election during times of favourable polling, outside Senate election windows. Half-Senate elections can strengthen Senate representation when the government holds the House, last occurring in 1970. There have been 4 unsuccessful referendums to abolish this phenomenon. The Tony Abbott onion video. In March 2015, then Prime Minister Tony Abbott bit into a raw, unpeeled onion during a visit to a farm in Tasmania, an act captured on video that went viral. While touring to promote freight subsidy, he took the bite, seemingly spontaneously, handed to him by the farmer, later saying that it was beautiful and a way to honour the farmer's pride. The hilarious moment drew global attention with millions of views online, mixed reactions from ridicule to admiration, while Abbott defended it as part of his role to champion Australian produce. The birthday cake interview. In the lead up to the 1993 federal election, opposition leader John Hewson appeared on A Current Affair with Mike Billisey, who asked if a birthday cake would cost more or less under Hewson's proposed GST tax reform. At this time, Australia did not yet have a sales tax. Hewson struggled to answer the question clearly, exposing confusion over his policy. The birthday cake interview became a turning point in that year's federal election, undermining Hewson's credibility in the Liberal Party's campaign. Widely seen as a key factor in their loss to Paul Keating's Labour Party, it highlighted the complexity of the tax plan and Hewson's inability to simplify it, costing him what many called the unlosable election. I would like to point out this comment under the video. It's tragic that when a politician actually tried to answer a question truthfully and in detail, it ruined his career. Nowadays they would just lie and say cheaper. Tier 5. Civil War close calls. Australia, luckily, has not had a civil war, but we have been close. Twice. During the days of the First World War, debate among conscripting young Australian men had raged, culminating in 2 failed plebiscites. Amongst the premiers, all but one supported conscription, the outlier being T.J. Ryan from Queensland. T.J. Ryan's oratory skills convinced many to support the anti-conscriptionist cause. However, then Prime Minister Billy Hughes criminalised speech that would, quote, harm recruiting efforts, including anti-conscription speech. Fortunately, under parliamentary privilege, politicians can say what they like on the floor, so transcripts of anti-conscription speeches were published in the Hansard and copies were printed en masse in Brisbane. Hughes would later order a raid on the Queensland Government Printing Office. Ryan and Hughes met the next day and stated the consequences would arise if Hughes used martial law to stop the printing of Hansard speeches. Ryan ordered the Queensland Police to defend the printing office from any attempts by the military to raid it again, and in the event of a battle with the federal government, trade unionists were enlisted as special constables. Plans were made to destroy railway lines, block the Brisbane River, and for Queensland to communicate with other countries. In 1932, New South Wales Premier Jack Lang clashed with the federal government over economic policy during the Great Depression. Lang refused to help pay debts Australia owed to British bondholders, stating that the money was needed for government workers. The federal government, led by Prime Minister Joseph Lyons, passed laws to force New South Wales to pay, escalating tensions. If the money was spent paying back debts, Lang argued, that would be akin to slavery, as government workers would have to work with no pay, conflicting with the Slavery Abolition Act 1833. Lang then withdrew all state funds in cash and locked it in the Sydney Trades Hall, with access blocked by New South Wales Police, prompting accusations of rebellion. On the 13th of May, New South Wales Governor Sir Philip Game sacked Lang, citing illegal actions. This enraged Lang supporters, who was deeply popular with the New South Wales Police and the New South Wales public. Lang, in his autobiography, stated that he considered having the governor arrested, and considering his aforementioned popularity, as well as the fact that at the time the New South Wales Police was nearly as large as the army, and Canberra being completely enclaved by New South Wales, set the stage for civil war. By that point, Lang had backed down. Fortunately, we did not have a civil war. Just goes to show that Australian politics is more interesting than you think. For further elaboration, watch Friendly Geordie's video on TJ Lang and Emperor Tiger Star's video on Jack Lang, and tell them I sent you. Joe for PM. The Joe for PM campaign was a 1987 bid by Queensland Premier Joby Bjelke-Petersen to become Australia's Prime Minister. Launched in January, he aimed to break the federal Liberal National Coalition, replace Nationals leader Ian Sinclair, and challenge Labour Prime Minister Bob Hawke. Backed by Queensland businessmen and some Conservatives, it promised policies like a 25% flat income tax, which gained him 20% voter support in the polls. Internal party resistance, led by figures like Sinclair and John Howard, then Liberal leader and future Prime Minister, whom Joe wished to replace with Andrew Peacock, and a lack of broad appeal caused its collapse by June. While Joe was on holiday at Disneyland, Hawke called an election in July, with the coalition split worsening his loss to Hawke. Bjelke-Petersen's push, coinciding with the Fitzgerald inquiry into Queensland corruption, ended his career that December, cementing that campaign as a bizarre chapter in Australian politics. I highly encourage you to check out Joe for PM by Paul Davey. The Malcolm Fraser trousers incident. Former Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser was found trouserless in the lobby of the Admiral Benbow Inn, a seedy Memphis hotel, after a night out during a US trip. He claimed he had been drugged and robbed of his pants, wallet and $10,000 Rolex watch by a woman he'd met, though no charges were filed. Fraser faced public embarrassment as Australian media speculated wildly. Some tied it to a prank, others to a scandal. The Pauline Hanson imprisonment. Pauline Hanson, co-founder of One Nation and current senator for Queensland, as well as David Ettridge, were convinced of electoral fraud in August 2003 by a Brisbane district court. They were sentenced to 3 years in prison for falsely claiming 500 supporters were party members to register One Nation in Queensland and secure nearly $500,000 in electoral funding. Hanson also faced charges of dishonesty for obtaining these funds. After 11 weeks, the Queensland Court of Appeal quashed their convictions, ruling the evidence didn't prove beyond reasonable doubt that the listed supporters weren't members, freeing them both immediately. This has been described as political persecution by some figures, including Pauline Hanson herself. Charles Dickens' son was a New South Wales politician. Charles Dickens, author of some of the most influential works in the English language, had a son who was a politician in New South Wales. Edward Dickens served as a member for the election of Wilkenya, a remote town in western New South Wales, in the New South Wales Legislative Assembly for 5 years with the Protectionist Party, and was nominated but later withdrew as a candidate for the remote seat of Wentworth in 1882. He died in 1902 and is buried in Moree, New South Wales. Secret tunnel under Queensland Parliament. Secret tunnels under Queensland Parliament in Brisbane were partially constructed in the 1980s during Joe Bjelke-Petersen's premiership. Intended as a discreet entry and exit for politicians amid security concerns, the project was abandoned mid-construction and was nearly revived when 1 William Street was being constructed, but it was abandoned as well due to concerns ministers would use it to avoid scrutiny, leaving a 50-metre concrete passage beneath the parliamentary precinct. Rediscovered years later, the unfinished tunnel, accessible via a hidden door, features rough walls and dead ends. A 2023 7 News tour revealed its existence, sparking public intrigue, though no evidence ties it to broader conspiracies. Today it is used for storage, for things such as Christmas decorations. Prime Ministers that died in office. 3 Australian Prime Ministers have died in office: Joseph Lyons, John Curtin and Harold Holt. Joseph Lyons was the first to die due to a heart attack in 1939. 6 years later, due to the stress put on him because of Australia's war effort, combined with his history of smoking and drinking, gave him heart disease in 1994 and died weeks before Japan surrendered. And only 3 months after FDR had died. Harold Holt disappeared in December 1967. We covered his disappearance in Tier 2. The 1933 Western Australian Independence Referendum. On the 8th of April 1933, Western Australia held a referendum on succession from the Australian Federation, driven by economic grievances during the Great Depression. The Dominion League, backed by farmers and business leaders, argued Western Australia's mineral and agricultural wealth was being exploited by eastern states. Voters approved independence nearly 2 votes to 1. A delegation petitioned Britain's Parliament, but the 1935 Imperial Select Committee rejected it, citing the Commonwealth's indivisibility under the 1901 Constitution. John Barilaro colluded with New South Wales counter-terrorism. The theory that John Barilaro colluded with New South Wales counter-terrorism police stems from the June 2021 arrest of Friendly Geordie's producer Christo Lanka by the Fixated Persons Unit for allegedly stalking the former New South Wales Deputy Premier. Critics claim Barilaro leveraged the unit meant for terrorism threats after meeting them in December 2020 following his disputes with the YouTuber. Evidence provided by Friendly Geordies in his videos undermined police claims and charges were dropped in March 2022. Barilaro denied involvement, but the timing and the FPU's role fueled speculation of political misuse. The 1974 joint sitting. The 1974 joint sitting of Australia's Parliament was the first and only under Section 57 of the Constitution, held on the 6th and 7th of August after a double dissolution election. Triggered by Gough Whitlam's Labour government facing a hostile Senate, it aimed to pass 6 deadlocked bills from 1973, including Medicare's precursor and electoral reforms. After the May 1974 election, Labour secured a workable majority in the joint session, with 95 Labour MPs against 93 coalition and crossbench MPs passing all 6 bills. The Dart of Shame controversy. The Dart of Shame controversy occurred in September 2012 when radio host Alan Jones, speaking at a Sydney University Liberal Club dinner, claimed Prime Minister Julia Gillard's father, John Gillard, who had recently died of shame because of her lies. The remarks, secretly recorded, sparked outrage, leading to over 80 advertisers pulling their support from Jones' 2GB show, costing the station up to $1.5 million. Jones apologised, calling it a private quip gone public, but Gillard never accepted his apology. No Prime Minister has been born in Brisbane. This is a very interesting fact. No Prime Minister has ever been born in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia's 3rd largest city. Brisbane is home to around 2.8 million people. Of the Prime Ministers born in Queensland, Arthur Fadden was born in Ingham, Frank Ford was born and Mitchell, and Kevin Rudd was born on the Sunshine Coast. Australia is due for a federal election, and Liberal leader Peter Dutton may become the first Prime Minister in 125 years to be born in Brisbane. Bob Katter egged the Beatles. In June 1964, Bob Katter, then a 19-year-old university student, and his friends pelted the Beatles with eggs as they arrived in Brisbane during their Australian tour. A group of 8,000 fans greeted the band, but Katter's crew threw eggs from the crowd, prompting the Beatles' truck to speed off. After the incident made headlines, the band advertised for the culprits to come forward. He outed himself in 2004, claiming it was an intellectual reaction against Beatlemania. The Petrov Affair. The Petrov Affair began in April 1954 when Vladimir Petrov, a Soviet diplomat and KGB officer, defected in Canberra seeking asylum in Australia. Approached by ASIO, he offered intelligence on Soviet espionage, exposing a spy ring. His wife Evdokia was forcibly detained by Soviet agents at Sydney Airport, but defected on April 19th after public outcry and ASIO intervention. Prime Minister Robert Menzies announced it weeks before the 1954 election, establishing a royal commission that found Soviet infiltration but no Australian culprits. Pistol and Boo. In May 2015, Barnaby Joyce, Australia's agricultural minister, threatened to euthanize Johnny Depp's Yorkshire Terriers, Pistol and Boo, after Depp smuggled them into Australia on a private jet without quarantine clearance for filming of a Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Joyce gave a 50-hour ultimatum: send the dogs back to the US or face their destruction, citing strict biosecurity laws to protect against diseases like rabies. The incident sparked global outcry, a petition to save the dogs, but they were eventually returned to California. The ALP schism of 1955. The 1955 ALP split was a major division in the Australian Labor Party, driven by Cold War anti-communist tensions. Labor leader H.V. Doc Evatt denounced the industrial groups, which were anti-communist factions linked to B.A. Santa Maria's Catholic movement. In response, right-wing Victorian ALP members were expelled, forming the Democratic Labour Party, known as the DLP. The DLP directed their preferences to the Liberals, weakening Labour and keeping them out of power until 1972. Tier 6. Chinese mole in Canberra. In February 2024, ASIO Director General Mike Burgess revealed that a former Australian politician, active until at least the early 2010s, was recruited by foreign spies, dubbed the A-Team, to advance their nation's interests. Speaking at his annual threat assessment, Burgess stated that the ex-MP sold out Australia by providing contacts and insights before 2018 foreign interference laws were introduced, meaning no charges were able to be filed. The A-Team used fake networking events and lavish trips to target Australians, even attempting to involve a Prime Minister's family member. While Burgess didn't name the country, speculation points to China, fueling debate over espionage risks and transparency. The 2019 Australian Parliament infiltration plot. In November 2019, Wang Li-Zhang, a self-proclaimed Chinese spy, defected to Australia, alleging a Beijing orchestrated plot to infiltrate the Australian Parliament. He claimed to have worked for a Hong Kong-based front company, China Innovation Investment Limited, tasked with manipulating elections and installing pro-China figures. Wang pointed to Bo Nick Zhao, a Liberal Party member and car dealer who was allegedly offered $1 million to run as an MP in Melbourne's Chisholm electorate. Zhao reported this to ASIO in 2018 but was found dead in a hotel room in March 2019. His death was ruled unexplained. ASIO and federal police investigated Wang's claims, which included broader interference in Taiwan and Hong Kong, but no charges or conclusive findings emerged publicly. The saga heightened scrutiny of foreign influence, prompting tighter security laws, though Wang's credibility remains debated. The 2021 Australian Parliament House sexual misconduct allegations. In February 2021, Brittany Higgins, a Liberal Party staffer, alleged that she was raped in March 2019 by colleague Bruce Lamb and then Defence Industry Minister Linda Reynolds' office in Parliament House, sparking widespread controversy. Higgins claimed she was pressured to stay silent, igniting a firestorm against the Morrison government over workplace culture. Subsequent revelations included leaked videos of male staffers performing sex acts in Parliament and allegations against Attorney General Christian Porter of historical rape, which he had denied. The scandals prompted a national reckoning, with the March for Justice protests across Australia demanding accountability. A 2021 review by Kate Jenkins found 1 in 3 parliamentary workers face sexual harassment. In 2024, a federal court civil ruling found that Lemon most likely raped Brittany Higgins, though his 2022 criminal trial ended in a mistrial. Port Arthur was a false flag. The conspiracy theory that the Port Arthur massacre was a false flag claims that the Port Arthur massacre, a shooting in Tasmania where Martin Bryant killed 35 people, was orchestrated by the Australian government or foreign entities, not a lone gunman. Proponents argued that it was staged to justify strict gun control laws enacted soon after, citing Bryant's alleged low IQ and lack of firearms training as evidence he couldn't have acted alone. Some alleged involvement of foreign operatives, pointing to discrepancies like a pre-positioned mortuary truck or the cafe crime scene's condition. Official inquiries and evidence affirmed Bryant's guilt, but theorists, including figures like Pauline Hanson in 2019, persist, fueled by distrust in government and narratives and online platforms amplifying alternative accounts. However, no credible proof supports the theory. The John Brogden suicide attempt. On the 30th of August 2005, John Brogden, former New South Wales opposition leader, attempted suicide in his Pittwater election office. It was after resigning over a scandal involving racist remarks and inappropriate behaviour at a July function. Found unconscious with self-inflicted wounds, he was hospitalised, prompting shock among colleagues. Media, including the Daily Telegraph, exaggerated claims alleging a sordid past with multiple sexual advances despite limited evidence beyond the initial initial incident. A leaked suicide note destroyed by Brogden after police returned it fueled speculation when its contents spread. Despite assurances, no copies existed. The press frenzy amplified his shame, though he fortunately recovered, later advocating for mental health as Lifeline chairman and one of the most respected men in Australian public life, respected on both sides of the political spectrum. Assassination attempts. Australia's history of assassination attempts is sparse but notable. In 1868, Prince Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh, survived the country's first assassination attempt when Henry James O'Farrell shot him in Sydney, motivated by Irish nationalism, wounding him non-fatally. In 1966, opposition leader Arthur Calwell was shot at close range by Peter Coken after an anti-conscription rally in Mosman, escaping with minor injuries from glass shards. In 1994, New South Wales Labor MP John Newman was gunned down outside his Cabramatta home by rival Phrong No, the only successful political assassination tied to local gang disputes. In late 2022, YouTuber Friendly Geordie's house was firebombed by organised crime. 2024, Bishop Mari Emanuel survived a stabbing in Sydney after being threatened online by Muslims for condemning Islam. Federal politicians convicted of crimes. Australian politics does not have an extensive history of criminal activity, at least we know of, and those who were convicted were not convicted of serious crimes. The only former Prime Minister to be convicted of a crime is John Curtin, convicted of failing to comply with a compulsory medical examination for conscription. Australia, being a convict nation, once had a convict MP from Toowoomba serve in the inaugural Parliament in 1901. He served as the member for Darling Downs for only 4 months, becoming the first ever MP to die in office. Other notable convictions include the aforementioned Pauline Hanson, who served 11 weeks in 2003 for electoral fraud over party registration before her conviction was overturned. Michael Cobb and Bob Woods, coalition MPs, received suspended jail sentences in the late 90s for rorting travel expenses. Craig Thompson, a Labour MP, was fined $25,000 in 2014 for misusing union funds pre-Parliament. And Andrew Theonopolis, another Labour MP, was jailed for 6 years in 2002 for bribery and fraud tied to immigration schemes. One MP, however, has unfortunately been convicted of murder. Thomas Lee, an MP from Sydney in the late 1920s, was convicted of murder in 1947 following the 1946 murder of T. John McBain Moody, likely due to financial disputes and paranoia amidst his declining mental health and finances. While some speculate jealousy played a role, there is no strong evidence that Leigh wrongly believed Moody was his mistress's lover. Thomas Leigh has also been associated with the deaths of political rivals during his time in Australia. Federal politicians that died in office. Death is an unfortunate part of life, and with that, Australian politics will be plunged into mourning once or twice a year. Alongside the 3 Prime Ministers that died in office, recent examples include Jim Molan and Linda White from the Senate and Peter Murphy from the House. The oldest to die in office was Billy Hughes in 1952, Australia's longest serving MP, who served for 51 years and who also served as Prime Minister during World War I. The youngest to die in office was Charlie Fraser at 33 years old in 1913. Peter Dutton arrested Democracy Manifest. A bit more of a light-hearted entry. Democracy Manifest is arguably one of Australia's most iconic memes. I can't do it justice, you'll just have to watch the video for yourself. I have heard claims that one of the officers that arrested the Democracy Manifest man was the current opposition leader and potentially future Prime Minister Peter Dutton. Unfortunately, there is no evidence to back this up. How cool would that have been if a future Prime Minister helped create one of the most important events in Australian internet folklore? Peter Dutton was one of the Pinkenba Six. In May 1994, 6 Queensland police officers, later dubbed the Pinkenba Six, picked up 3 Aboriginal boys aged 12 to 14 from Fortitude Valley, a suburb of Brisbane. The boys luckily didn't commit any crimes but were driven in separate patrol cars to Pinkenba, a swampy industrial area at 4 a.m. There, the officers allegedly threatened them, removed their shoes and abandoned them, forcing them to walk home. The officers were charged with deprivation of liberty, but the charges were dropped. Online, there is speculation the current opposition leader and potential future Prime Minister Peter Dutton was one of the Pinkenba Six. Peter Dutton was a police officer in the 1990s, his service overlapping with the incident. Many people online speculate that he was one of the 6 men, likely due to a suppression order that initially hid their names. Many conspiracy theories on social media further the theory that he was involved. However, these claims are baseless, as the identities of the 6 men that were involved, their names listed on screen, have been disclosed.
And that is it. That is the Australian political iceberg explained. 6 tiers of insightfully deep knowledge. Hopefully you learned something watching this video. I know I did scripting it. Why is there a question mark instead of a full stop there? I'm sorry, I'm just reading the teleprompter. Would you guys like more political iceberg explanation videos? Once a week I will release a video, most of which for the time being will pertain to Australia's political system in anticipation of the upcoming election. I ask that you like, comment, subscribe and share, as well as checking out my Linktree, where on my other YouTube channel and on Twitter I do live streams, my Rumble, my Discord, my Instagram and my TikTok. If you would like to help me, please consider joining my Patreon for as little as $5 Australian a month. That would be deeply appreciated, and I would also deeply appreciate you telling me how I could improve my videos. Thank you all for watching, and God bless you all.